Hello and welcome to the Denverse. I'm Derek, and today we're going to talk about this matchup between the Colorado Avalanche and the St. Louis Blues in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Now, by some metrics, the Avalanche are favored to win the Stanley Cup by as much as any team in the last 10 years, at least according to The Athletic. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't lose in the first round to the St. Louis Blues. I think everyone who's a hockey fan and knows this Avalanche team is worried because we've seen in the past few years and throughout the history of the Stanley Cup playoffs, especially since expansion, that the favorites can lose easily. We saw it a couple years ago when the Avs knocked off the number one seed Flames pretty easily. Wasn't even a close series. But then we've seen the Flames sort of fall off since then, so we've seen that trend play out. On the other end of it, the Tampa Bay Lightning also lost in the first round, and then the next year were able to come back and win the Stanley Cup. I have some confidence in the Avs because they've seen how hard the playoffs are in the last 2 years, losing in 7 games in a heartbreaker to the San Jose Sharks 2 years ago, and then to the Dallas Stars, which was coupled with some injuries in the bubble last year. However, the history between these two teams has already been fierce, and we're looking for this to really develop into a rivalry between two teams that normally play in the same division and did again this year. You might remember that last year in the bubble, Nazem Kadri scored that goal with no time left on the clock. It was .01 when it went over for the Avs to beat the Blues in regulation. The Blues had finished the regular season that was shortened at the top of the Western Conference, but they fell to 4th because of their play, including in that game in the divisional round, and then they ended up losing to Vancouver in the first round. You also may remember that in 2018, the season came down to game 82, the last game of the season between the Blues and the Avs. The Avs needed a regulation win to make the playoffs and knock the Blues out of that last spot, and they got it, winning 5-1 and completely crushing the Blues in the process. The Blues did go on to win the Stanley Cup next year, so it's not like they're infallible. Some of the extended drama really began in the closing seconds of the Avs' victory to secure the President's Trophy against the Kings a few nights ago, when Blues captain Ryan O'Reilly came out and basically said, "We know how to beat this team and we're going to win this series." Now, of course, longtime Avalanche fans know that Ryan O'Reilly is a former Colorado Avalanche player. He was drafted in 2009, the same year as Matt Duchene, in the second round. He was a surprise to make that team. At the beginning of his career, Ryan O'Reilly was a defensive forward who did a lot for the team, doing all of the little things, had the biggest work ethic, and at times outshined Matt Duchene, including when their first contract was up. Now, Matt Duchene took a team-friendly deal, and Ryan O'Reilly held out for more money. The team had falsely put a cap on how much money they were going to spend, saying they weren't going to pay anyone more than Matt Duchene, and so Ryan O'Reilly was willing to hold out. This was during the last lockout year, so they didn't actually start playing until January. And then the Calgary Flames offered Ryan O'Reilly a contract, and the Avs had to give him a $6.5 million contract for that season, more than Duchene. I was actually in the locker room when Matt Duchene found out about the contract. This whole thing went down in the middle of a game, and we went down, and Matt Duchene was shocked. And there have been reports to the contrary at the time, but you could tell standing there with Duchene how upset he was about O'Reilly's contract. 2 years later, in the middle of the dissolution of the Patrick Roy era, Ryan O'Reilly was traded to Buffalo, and part of that was just a divide in the locker room. Nathan MacKinnon and Ryan O'Reilly were really close. They had the same work ethic, I think the same intensity in a lot of ways, and I think losing O'Reilly was hard for the team in some ways, but the locker room was divided between O'Reilly and Duchene. But a lot of players near the end of Duchene's time in Colorado were sick of him and happy to see him go, and they ended up losing both of them. Ryan O'Reilly went to Buffalo and then was traded to the Blues and then became really the centerpiece for the Blues, is the captain there now, and was the Conn Smythe Trophy winner when the Blues won the Cup 2 years ago. The second storyline is really just how this season played out between these teams. They played opening night in January, and the Avs lost 4-1, really had a lackluster performance, and the Blues really dominated them. The Avs came out the next game and scored 5 power play goals and won the game 8-0. It was tied after the first period, so the Avs got 8 goals in the final 2 periods of that game. Games 2 and 3 were close, but the Avs won 3-2 and 2-1. And then the Avs split the last 4 games of the series. One game happened before the COVID break. The Avs won that one. They took a week off. The Avs then won the next game after the COVID break. This was COVID break number 2 for the Avs. And then sort of fell apart after that and lost the last 2 games. It's really hard to say what the matchup is. In the season series, the Avs won 5 of the 8 games, and 2 of their losses came after that break. So you'd say the Avs have the advantage, and they really do have the advantage talent-wise. The Blues have lost some important pieces from that Stanley Cup team, and they're also dealing with some COVID issues right now. David Perron, who's one of their top players, is going to be out at least at the beginning of the series, along with some of their other players. So the Blues are already hurting. And then they gave a contract extension to Jordan Binnington, the Stanley Cup winning goaltender from 2 years ago, and he has not played well since then. He has sort of fallen off his game. And Jordan Binnington is really the key to this series. If I see the Avs losing this series, it's either because they've sustained a lot of injuries, especially to Philip Grubauer, or Jordan Binnington steals the series. And in hockey, unlike any other sport, you can have a guy on the defensive end just play phenomenal and win the series for your team. The Avs have been carried in previous years by goaltending at times, and the Blues need to be carried by Jordan Binnington, who has shown that promise when he did take the Blues to the Stanley Cup Finals and win it 2 years ago. But let's not pretend that Jordan Binnington is Patrick Waugh here. He was 16-10 in that playoff run. Waugh, in his 4 Stanley Cups, only lost 5, 4, 6, and 10 games. So at best for Binnington, he's at the low end of the Patrick Waugh era as far as goaltending. For him to steal the series is really going to be a surprise. His record on the year was 18-14, so about 500. And if you're looking at this series going 7, you have to give the advantage to the Avs just because of the depth they have, the defensive mindset, and having home ice advantage in Game 7. The final key for the Avs in this series is if they can stay healthy, as I mentioned. It looks like everyone's going to be back of the guys that we expect to play. There are a few guys that we're not going to see in the playoffs. Matt Calvert, Logan O'Connor, maybe someone we see in the later rounds, and Eric Johnson. But Nathan MacKinnon is practicing, and that's good news. Bowen Byram, the rookie defenseman, is expected to be back at some point. And all of the other guys who've been out with injuries, we're expecting to see back. So that's a good sign. But again, protecting Philip Grubauer at all costs. And unfortunately, we've seen that it just takes one guy sliding into a goaltender to take him out. I mean, that's what's happened to Grubauer several times in his injury stints over the last couple of years. And so you have to hope that doesn't happen. I really don't see Devin Dubnyk or Jonas Johansson backstopping this team to a lot of victories. And if they lose Grubauer, we're looking at a situation where they lose a series. I don't think the Avs even need to play their best hockey to win this series, but they have to play solidly. If Nathan MacKinnon is back to full form, I could see this series only going 4 or 5 games. That's it for the Denverse. We'll be back a lot over this playoff run with these short episodes, just sort of recapping where we are. I'm trying to make these episodes short, but also informative, so if you're a diehard Avs fan, you can still get something out of this. But if you're a casual fan of the Avs or any of the other teams, this is a good way to get a short bite of what's going on. Expecting to do some Nugget stuff this week with Quinn. For now, I'm Derek. See ya.